I walked into that conference room and felt every eye in the place turn toward me, like I'd just sprouted a second head. Brandon was already there, sitting at the head of the mahogany table with his arms crossed, that smug expression plastered across his face. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'd like you to meet my wife. Ashley, she works in the warehouse." The way he said it, warehouse, like it was some kind of joke, made my chest tighten. But what happened next in that room, what I revealed in front of all those executives and board members, changed everything. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I wasn't supposed to walk in there with ammunition I never knew I had. Let me rewind. 3 weeks earlier, my life looked exactly like a Pinterest board for suburban success. Brandon and I lived in this gorgeous colonial in Westchester Hills, the kind of neighborhood where HOA meetings were mandatory and gossip was currency. We'd been married for 8 years, and honestly, most of the time felt like we were playing the role perfectly. Him in his tailored suits, heading off to his important meetings at Henderson and Associates, a mid-size investment firm. Me, working my way up from warehouse supervisor to operations manager at a logistics company that actually valued my work. The house was beautiful, 4 bedrooms, granite countertops, a kitchen island where we almost never ate together anymore. Our walk-in closet was the size of some people's bedrooms. My 401k was solid. My credit score was pristine. I'd even convinced Brandon to go to the Hamptons for Labor Day weekend, which meant something in his world. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but I was starting to notice cracks. Brandon had been distant for months, not the kind of distant where you fight about it, worse, the kind where he's physically there, scrolling on his phone during dinner, taking calls in his office late at night, texting someone while we're watching Netflix. I asked him about it once, tried to be cool about it. "Work stress," he'd said, kissing my forehead like I was a kid asking why the sky was blue. "Just Henderson pushing me harder, you know how it is." I didn't know. I wasn't in his world. That was the problem, wasn't it? I was the warehouse girl, and he was the investment guy. When we first met at that bar in Murray Hill 7 years ago, the difference felt romantic. He was ambitious, sharp, always talking about deals and market trends. I was solid, practical, the person who actually got things done. We'd balanced each other out. Now, I think the balance just meant he could keep his world completely separate from mine. My mom had noticed it too. She'd call me on Sunday afternoons, and after asking about the house and my job, she'd say things like, "How's Brandon really doing?" with that tone that meant she was worried but didn't want to pry. My best friend Jennifer, who worked in HR and had a sixth sense for relationship dynamics, had started asking if everything was okay. "You seem tired," she'd said last week over coffee. Like, emotionally tired. I wasn't tired. I was starting to get suspicious. It wasn't anything dramatic, not at first. Just small things. He'd get a text, and his jaw would tighten. He'd close his laptop really fast if I walked into his office. One afternoon, I accidentally picked up his dry cleaning from the wrong spot and found a receipt in the pocket of his suit jacket. A restaurant downtown, a place we'd never been. The charge was for 2 people, and it was from a Thursday when he'd told me he was working late. I confronted him about it. He laughed. Actually laughed. "That was a client dinner, Ash. I told you about it." He hadn't. But instead of pushing back, I just didn't. I let it slide. That was my pattern, apparently. Let things slide until they pile up so high you can't see over them anymore. Then came the day I found the second phone. It was a Tuesday morning. Brandon had left for work early, something about a 7 a.m. call with the West Coast office. I was running late myself, rushing around the bedroom looking for my black blazer, when I noticed his gym bag on the floor of his closet. The zipper was halfway open, and a corner of what looked like a phone was sticking out. That was weird. Brandon had a phone. The iPhone he carried everywhere, checked constantly, kept on the nightstand, even when we were in bed. I knew, even as I reached for it, that I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. I knew that pulling out that phone meant opening a door to something terrible. Part of me wanted to put it back, zip up the bag, and just pretend I'd never seen it. But I pulled it out anyway. The lock screen showed a photo of Brandon and some blonde woman I'd never seen before. She was young, like significantly younger, mid-20s maybe. She was wearing a sundress, laughing, her hand on his arm. The intimacy of it made my stomach drop. My hands started shaking as I tried different passcodes. 1994, the year he was born. Nothing. Our anniversary, 0715. Nothing. I was about to give up when I tried 1111, and it opened. The messages were right there on the home screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. Missing you already. The presentation went great. She had no idea I wasn't even there. Love you so much. When are we telling people? My vision went blurry. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed, the phone still in my hand, feeling like I was watching my life from outside my body. There were hundreds of messages. Months of them. The first one dated back to February. Brandon had been seeing someone else for 10 months, and the whole time he'd been coming home to me, kissing me, telling me he loved me, lying about where he was every single day. I didn't even think. I just started screenshotting everything. Names, dates, messages, photos. My fingers moved on autopilot. There was an entire folder of pictures. Him and this girl, at restaurants, at hotels, at what looked like a beach house somewhere. In one of them, they were in bed together, and she was wearing his Harvard ring. His Harvard ring. The one I'd given him for our 5-year anniversary. I heard the garage door open downstairs. My heart stopped. Brandon was back. He'd forgotten something and come back home. I shoved the phone back into his gym bag with trembling fingers and zipped it closed, trying to make it look exactly like it had been. I stood up, smoothed down my hair, and tried to breathe normally. My brain was moving at 1,000 miles per hour, but my body was stuck in slow motion. He appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, already loosening his tie. Hey babe, forgot my laptop charger. You still here? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me shift. The way he was looking at me was the same way he'd been looking at me for months. Casual, distant. Like I was furniture in a room he was passing through. Just heading out, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were still shaking. Have a good day at work. He kissed me on the cheek, grabbed his charger, and left. I stood there in our perfect bedroom, in our perfect house, in our perfect life, and realized that none of it was real. And worse, he had no idea that I knew. I spent the next week in a fog, going through the motions, driving to work, sitting in meetings, pretending to pay attention while my brain was screaming. Every night I'd come home and Brandon would be there, or he wouldn't be, and either way, it felt like a knife in my chest. When he was home, I could barely look at him. When he wasn't, I wondered where he really was. I didn't tell anyone. Not Jennifer, not my mom, not even my therapist, and I'd been seeing Dr. Reeves every other Thursday for 3 years. I just sat in her office and talked about work stress and how the HOA was being difficult about our landscaping again. She kept asking if something else was going on, and I kept lying and saying no. The truth was, I was paralyzed. I had screenshots of everything, the messages, the photos, all of it saved in a hidden folder on my phone labeled Tax Documents 2019, like some kind of sick joke. But knowing and doing something about it were two completely different things. This was my marriage. 8 years. Our families knew each other. We had friends in common. Our names were hyphenated on the deed to the house. If I said anything, everything would blow up. If I didn't say anything, I'd be the woman who knew her husband was cheating and did nothing. The woman who stayed. The woman who accepted it. By Friday, I couldn't breathe properly anymore. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. I'd be sitting at my desk and suddenly feel like my chest was caving in. My operations manager, Derek, noticed. He pulled me aside around 4 p.m. and asked if I was feeling okay. You look like you haven't slept in days, he said, not unkindly. Derek was in his 50s, divorced twice, and had a way of seeing through people's bullshit. I'm fine, I said. Just tired. Is it Brandon? He asked, and I literally flinched. What? I'm just asking if your husband's being demanding. I know he calls you sometimes during work. I realized how little Derek actually knew about my life. He knew I was married, knew my husband's name, but had no idea that my entire world was collapsing. That's what happens when you're the warehouse girl. People don't ask too many questions. They're happy to let you exist in that box. That night, I made a decision. I was going to confront Brandon. Not in some dramatic way, not screaming or throwing things. I was going to be calm and collected, the way I approached everything in my life. I'd present the evidence, give him a chance to explain, and then we'd figure out what came next. Maybe there was something I didn't understand. Maybe, and I hated myself for this thought, maybe there was a way to fix it. I waited until Saturday morning. Brandon usually slept in on Saturdays, but I woke up early. He was annoyed at first, groaning and turning over, but then he saw my face and something shifted. He sat up, suddenly alert. "What's wrong?" he asked. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I showed him the screenshots, the messages, the photos of him and that girl. Her name was Madison, by the way. Madison Kerr. 23 years old, worked in marketing at some startup in Manhattan. I'd looked her up on LinkedIn while lying awake at 3 a.m. Brandon's face went pale. And then, this was the part that hurt the most. He didn't deny it. He didn't scramble for an explanation or try to make it seem like something it wasn't. He just sat there, looking at those photos of himself with another woman, and he looked almost relieved. "Ashley," he said quietly. "Don't," I said. "Just don't. Tell me what's going on." He got out of bed. He was wearing his Harvard shirt, the one he slept in sometimes. He walked over to the window and looked out at our perfect suburban street, and when he spoke, his voice was so calm it made me want to scream. "I'm in love with her," he said. "I have been for a while. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. And I think I need to leave." I couldn't feel my legs. I literally couldn't feel them. It was like my body had decided to disconnect from the moment entirely and just observe it from somewhere outside itself. "You're in love with her," I repeated, tasting the words like they were poison. "Yes." "And you've been lying to me for 10 months. "Yes." "And now you're just going to leave." He turned around, and his expression was so sad, so pitying, that I wanted to hit him. "I don't want to hurt you, Ash. I never wanted to hurt you. But I can't keep pretending. It's not fair to either of us. Not fair to either of us. Not fair to either of us." The words echoed in my head like a broken record. He was worried about fairness. He was the one who'd been screwing someone else in secret, lying every single day. And he was concerned about fairness. I stood up. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. And I sat on the tile floor and cried in a way I didn't know was possible. Ugly, gasping sobs that made my whole body shake. All the things I hadn't let myself feel for the past week came pouring out. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, the absolute bone-deep devastation of realizing that the person I'd built a life with didn't actually want that life anymore. When I finally came out, Brandon was dressed. He had a small suitcase open on the bed. He was packing. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while," he said. "We can figure out logistics. I'll call my lawyer on Monday." His lawyer. He'd already thought about that. Of course he had. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was something he'd been planning. "Where's the ring?" I asked. "What?" "The Harvard ring. The one I gave you. Where is it?" He looked away. "I gave it back to her. A few months ago. Ashley, I didn't let him finish. I walked downstairs, and I heard him continue packing upstairs. I made coffee. I sat at our kitchen island, in the house we'd bought together, in the life we'd built together, and I drank coffee while my husband packed his bags to go live with his girlfriend. By 11 a.m., he was gone. I sat in that house for hours. Just sat. The silence was so loud it was deafening. My phone kept buzzing, Jennifer texting, my mom calling, but I couldn't answer. What would I even say? My husband left me for someone half his age, and apparently I was too much of a pushover to see it coming. Monday morning, I got a call from a divorce attorney. Brandon had already hired one and sent me her contact information. Her name was Linda Patterson, and she specialized in high-income divorces. The message said that Brandon wanted to make this as amicable as possible and suggested we both get representation. Amicable. He was leaving me for his mistress, and he wanted to make it amicable. That's when I made my second decision. I wasn't going to be the woman who just accepted this. I wasn't going to be graceful about it. I wasn't going to let him rewrite the narrative so that he was the good guy who just fell in love with someone else, and I was the poor abandoned wife who didn't understand. I called Linda Patterson, but I didn't hire her. Instead, I called a different divorce attorney, one that Jennifer's sister had used after her own messy split. His name was Tom Silverman, and when I described what had happened, he got very quiet. "You have documentation?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "Messages, photos, hotel charges on his credit card." "Okay," he said. "Okay, come in tomorrow. We need to talk about your options." That night, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into our shared financial accounts, the ones I technically had access to but never actually used, because Brandon handled all our money. I'd always been fine with that. He was the finance guy, and I had enough in my own accounts. It seemed simple. What I found made me sick. There was $100,000 missing from our joint savings. $100,000 transferred to an account I didn't recognize over the past 6 months in increments that were small enough not to trigger alerts. And that was just what I could see. Who knew what else there was? Who knew if he'd been planning this for longer than I thought? I screenshot everything. I called Tom Silverman's emergency line at 9 p.m. and left a message explaining what I'd found. He called me back within 10 minutes. "Don't touch anything," he said. "Don't transfer money. Don't close accounts. Don't do anything. Just document everything and bring it all to my office tomorrow. And Ashley, don't tell Brandon you know about this yet." I hung up the phone, and for the first time since he'd left, I felt something other than despair. It was a hard, cold feeling, like metal in my chest. He thought he could do this. He thought he could cheat on me, lie to me, steal from me, and walk away clean. He had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I walked into Tom Silverman's office with a folder full of screenshots and a list of every financial transaction I could find. Tom was in his early 60s, with gray hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing the worst of people's behavior for decades. He looked at what I'd brought him and let out a low whistle. "This is good," he said. "This is really good. In terms of infidelity, most states don't factor that into division of assets anymore. But financial misconduct? That's something else entirely. That's something a judge cares about." I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about the pain anymore. This was about justice. "What can we do?" I asked. Tom leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for a client like me. "Let me tell you about discovery," he said. Discovery meant Brandon couldn't hide anything anymore. Tom explained it during our second meeting, speaking slowly like I was a child who needed everything spelled out. "We file a motion," Tom said, tapping his pen against a legal pad. "The court orders Henderson and Associates to produce all financial records related to Brandon's employment, bonuses, stock options, everything. His email, his calendar, his communications with Madison Kerr. If she's connected to the company in any way, we get her records too. No more privacy. No more secrets." I felt something shift in my chest. Finally, something that looked like power. "How long does that take?" I asked. "Usually 30 to 60 days. But here's the thing, Ashley. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Once we file, Brandon will know you're coming for him. He'll lawyer up harder. His firm will get involved. We're not just fighting Brandon anymore. We're potentially fighting Henderson and Associates' entire legal team." I leaned back in my chair. "So what you're saying is, I should be ready for war." Tom smiled that cold smile again. I'm saying prepare yourself for the worst version of your husband that exists. But he didn't know what was about to happen next. None of us did. 2 days later, I was sitting at my desk at the logistics company when my phone rang. It was Derek, my operations manager. Can you come to the conference room? He said. His voice sounded strange, formal. My stomach dropped. Conference rooms meant meetings. Meetings meant something was wrong. When I walked in, Derek was there, along with someone I'd never seen before. A woman in a sharp gray suit with a clipboard. She looked up and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Ashley Chen, she said. That's me. I'm Margaret Walsh, Senior Vice President of Operations for Henderson and Associates. We need to talk about your husband. My vision went blurry for a second. What? Please, sit down. She gestured to a chair. Derek was suddenly very interested in the carpet. Margaret opened a folder. Inside were printouts of emails. My stomach twisted as I recognized the format. They looked like Brandon's work emails. Brandon has been transferring confidential client information to a competitor, Margaret said, her voice crisp and professional. We discovered it during a routine audit. The transfers began approximately 6 months ago and total roughly $300,000 in illicit payments. $300,000! Not $100,000. $300,000. I couldn't breathe. He's stolen money from his own company? Not stolen, technically. He was selling proprietary information. Trade secrets, client lists, investment strategies, market analysis. We have documentation going back months. But here's what's interesting, Ashley. Margaret leaned forward. Your name appears on some of these emails, forwarded to an account we believe is linked to you. That's not possible, I whispered. I don't know anything about that. We know, Margaret said calmly. That's why we're telling you before we go to the police. Because if you're complicit, we need to know now. The room started spinning. I'm not complicit. I didn't know about any of this. We believe you, Margaret said, and somehow that was worse than if she'd accused me. Which means your husband has been conducting corporate espionage and using your email to cover his tracks. That's federal crime territory, Ashley. The FBI gets involved. Prosecution. Possible imprisonment. Derek finally looked at me. His expression was one of pure pity. We wanted to give you a heads up, Margaret continued, because you're going to want to protect yourself. When this becomes public, and it will become public, you'll want documentation that you knew nothing about it. We can provide affidavits from our team confirming this conversation. It would help your divorce case considerably. She said it like she was doing me a favor. And the worst part was, she kind of was. I left that conference room in a daze. Derek tried to talk to me, but I just grabbed my purse and walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. Brandon wasn't just a cheater. He wasn't just a thief. He was a federal criminal, and he'd used my name to do it. I called Tom Silverman from my car. Federal crime, he said when I finished explaining. Jesus Christ, Ashley! This changes everything. This is leverage we didn't even know we had. What do I do? I asked. Don't talk to Brandon. Don't tell him you know. Let this play out. The FBI will contact you soon, probably within a week. When they do, you tell them exactly what Margaret Walsh told you. You cooperate fully. You become the innocent spouse who had no idea what her husband was doing, because that's the truth. And in the meantime, we use this. Use it for what? Everything, Tom said. Custody if you have kids. Alimony, division of assets, the house, his retirement, all of it. A federal crime conviction means he has zero credibility. We're not just getting a divorce anymore, Ashley. We're getting a complete and total dismantling of his life. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt something. But what I felt was cold, clear satisfaction. The FBI agents showed up at my office 3 days later. 2 of them, both in dark suits, both looking like they'd seen everything. They took me to a conference room and asked me to tell them everything I knew about Brandon's activities at Henderson and Associates. I told them about the $100,000 transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I told them about the second phone. I told them about Madison Kerr and the messages about presentations and lying. They took notes. They didn't seem surprised. "We've been building a case against Brandon for about 4 months," one of them said. His name was Agent Russo. "He's not the first person to do this, and he won't be the last, but it's helpful to have corroboration from family members." "Am I in trouble?" I asked. "My name was on some of the emails." "Not if you're telling us the truth, which we believe you are. We've pulled your email traffic. You're not involved. Your husband was using your account without your knowledge. We can see that from the metadata. That's actually part of what we're building the case on. Identity theft in addition to corporate espionage. More charges. More evidence against him. More ammunition for Tom." "There's something else you should know," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screenshots from Madison's phone. The messages, the photos, all of it. "He's been having an affair with Madison Kerr, who I believe works at the company he's been selling information to." Agent Russo exchanged a look with his partner. "That would make sense," he said. "We've been wondering how he was getting access to her company's contacts. If they're in a relationship, that would explain it." Brandon hadn't just been cheating. He'd been manipulated. Or he'd been using her. Or some combination of both. Either way, Madison Kerr was involved in the federal crime, which meant the FBI would be looking at her, too. I felt a small, dark bloom of satisfaction at that thought. The FBI agents left with copies of everything. They told me not to discuss the investigation with anyone, and I agreed. Then I went back to my desk and tried to work, even though my hands were shaking. By that evening, it was all over the news. Not my name, not the details, but investment firm executive under federal investigation for corporate espionage was enough. I watched the story break on NY1, and there was Brandon's LinkedIn photo, and the name of Henderson and Associates, and quotes from lawyers saying he would cooperate fully. He'd already been arrested. I found out through a news alert before anyone called me. He was sitting in a holding cell while his lawyer arranged bail. He was being charged with theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, and identity theft. Madison Kerr was being charged as an accessory. My phone started ringing. Mom, Jennifer, people from the HOA. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay, if Brandon was okay, what had happened. I told them all the same thing. "I'm cooperating with federal investigators. I can't discuss the details." It made me sound important. It made me sound like I wasn't the warehouse girl anymore. It made me sound like someone who knew what she was doing. The next morning, Tom called me. "Brandon's bail was set at $250,000, Tom said. "His lawyer is requesting a hearing to contest the charges. But here's what's important, Ashley. His assets are going to be frozen. The SEC is involved now. He won't be able to touch that $100,000 he stole without it being traced. He won't be able to hide money. Everything he has is subject to investigation and potential seizure." "So what does that mean for the divorce?" I asked. "It means you're going to get everything. The house, the retirement accounts, spousal support, potentially punitive damages. His criminal conviction will be part of the public record. Any judge in this state will look at that and rule completely in your favor. And Ashley? He can't even afford a good lawyer anymore. Henderson and Associates has already fired him and is suing him for damages. His career is over." I should have felt bad about that. I should have felt something other than the pure, crystalline satisfaction that was running through my veins. "There's one more thing," Tom continued. "Brandon's lawyer has asked to meet with you, a settlement conference outside of court. He wants to know if you'll accept a deal to make this go away quietly." "What kind of deal?" "The kind where you sign an NDA and agree not to talk about any of this publicly, and in exchange, he gives you more money up front and takes a bigger financial hit. Essentially, he's trying to buy your silence." I thought about that. I thought about the $100,000 he'd stolen. I thought about Madison Kerr. I thought about all the lies, all the late nights, all the times he'd kissed me while he was in love with someone else. "No deal," I said. There was a pause. Then Tom laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. The settlement conference was scheduled for 3 weeks later. By that time, Brandon had been released on bail, and he was living in a studio apartment in Murray Hill, the same neighborhood where we'd met. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked into the conference room at Tom's office building with my head high. Brandon was already there, sitting next to his lawyer, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the span of a month. His hair had gone gray, his suit was wrinkled. He looked broken. Good. Ashley, he said, standing up. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to— Don't, Tom said, putting a hand on my shoulder. My client has no interest in your apologies. Brandon's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to me, slid a document across the table. Settlement proposal, she said. Mr. Henderson is willing to offer $300,000 in immediate payment, the house free and clear, and an additional $5,000 per month in spousal support for 10 years. In exchange, Mrs. Chen agrees to sign an NDA and refrain from discussing the circumstances of the divorce publicly. $300,000, the exact amount he'd stolen from his firm. He thought he could pay me off with his own crime money. No, I said. Patricia blinked. You haven't even— No, I repeated. I'm not signing anything. I'm not taking a settlement. We're going to trial, and everything is going to come out. The affair, the federal crimes, all of it. And when the judge sees what he did, I'm going to get the house, his retirement accounts, spousal support, and possibly punitive damages. So no. No deal. Brandon's face went pale. Ashley, please. You have no idea what this is going to do to— To you? I said. I stood up. Good. I hope it destroys you. I hope you spend the rest of your life looking back at this moment and understanding exactly what you threw away. I walked out of that conference room, and I didn't look back. The trial took 6 months. 6 months of depositions and discovery, and Brandon's lawyer trying to paint me as a gold digger and a vindictive ex-wife. 6 months of sitting in courtrooms, while details of his affair were laid out in excruciating detail. 6 months of the judge asking him to explain his financial transfers and his use of my email and his relationship with Madison Kerr. Madison testified that she'd had no idea he was married. She cried on the stand. She said he'd told her he was getting a divorce. She said he'd promised her a future. She was young and naive and completely complicit, and somehow the judge seemed to believe her tears more than he believed the evidence. But it didn't matter what the judge thought about Madison. What mattered was what he thought about Brandon. On the day of the final ruling, the judge looked at Brandon from the bench and said words I'll never forget. Mr. Henderson, you have demonstrated a pattern of deception, financial misconduct, and betrayal that extends not only to your marriage, but to your employment and your legal obligations. This court finds that your actions were willful and deliberate, and that you have shown no remorse for the harm you have caused. He awarded me the house. He awarded me 50% of his retirement accounts and his investment portfolio. He awarded me $10,000 per month in spousal support for 15 years. And he allowed the federal charges to proceed without any interference from the divorce court. Brandon's total financial obligation to me was estimated at just under $2 million, calculated over the life of the support order and the division of assets. $2 million. When they announced the judgment, Brandon looked like he was going to be sick. His lawyer was already talking about appeals, but we all knew it was over. I walked out of that courthouse, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. The warehouse girl had won. Not because I was smarter than Brandon. Not because I was more ruthless or manipulative. I won because I had the truth on my side, and I refused to be silent about it. I won because I hired a lawyer who knew how to use the truth as a weapon. I won because I didn't settle, didn't accept the crumbs he was trying to throw at me, and didn't let him rewrite the narrative. 6 months later, I sold the house in Westchester Hills. I took the money and bought a smaller place in the city, closer to my office. I put Madison's LinkedIn photo as my screensaver for exactly 1 day, just to see her face every time I opened my computer. Then I deleted it. She wasn't worth the mental space. Brandon's trial on the federal charges is still ongoing. Last I heard, he was looking at possibly 3 to 5 years in prison. Madison got a plea deal. She's doing community service and probation. And me? I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm the woman who survived the warehouse, climbed her way up to operations manager, discovered her husband's affair and his federal crimes, and came out the other side, not just intact, but stronger. The moral of the story isn't that revenge is sweet, though it is. It's that silence is complicity, and speaking the truth, even when it destroys everything, is sometimes the only way to save yourself. I was the warehouse snob to Brandon. Now I'm the woman who brought him down. And I'm completely at peace with that.